Hi, everybody. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I am Matt Connerton, and this is the Honorable Gary S. Hopper. Are you awake, Gary?
No, I just said before we went on, I was ready to rock and roll, but I got to take a nap first.
Yes. You want to be well rested for
so
rocking and rolling.
Yeah, you don't want to just, because at my age you could break something.
Sure. It can be strenuous.
It can be.
Yes.
Hey, tonight we got Jay Ward, who is I've already forgotten. He's the director of the political director of the
State
Employees Union. Thanks.
Yeah,
I had that memorized.
Yes,
too.
yes.
Yeah. Jay's the guy who we talk with in the halls of the State House about right to work and all the other stuff. So I wanted him to come on and talk a little bit about that. He's got a lot of history. He looks like he's 20 years old, but he's actually was a state rep in 92 to 94.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't be quite as young as I thought you were.
I'm not.
No. Yeah, Lee Quant, who was on last week, told me that. I said, no way, he's not that old. Anyway, before we get started, cool beans. I went to my Uncle Bill's funeral today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he had been sick for a while, and it was one of those things where it was a function of time. It wasn't,
Sure.
you know. And so anyway, but he kept his he was fortunate. He kept his wits about him for the entirety of his life. He
Good.
didn't lose any gray matter. He had a lot more than mine. Me.
Really?
Oh yeah, easily.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we went to his funeral today, and one of my memories of Uncle Bill was he took us. You guys, I don't know if you remember. I think it was in Westford, maybe the old Oaken Bucket restaurant.
Ooh, I have no idea.
Anyways, it's pretty well known in the area. The old Oaken Bucket. He took me when I was about 9 years old to the old Oaken Bucket restaurant for an all-you-can-eat buffet. And it was a nice restaurant, so they had lobster. And when I was a little kid, I could pack away food. I mean, big time. I would eat until I passed out just about. And I just kept going back for like plates of lobster, another plate of lobster, another plate of lobster. The waitress is saying, "Oh, you could try some potatoes." No, thank you, ma'am. I was polite about it. They're getting upset though because I got in for like half price because I was a kid, and I just kept going and packing it away. My uncle Bill just thought this was the greatest thing because he was really getting his money's worth. You know?
Right.
So anyway, so that restaurant hasn't been around for quite a few years.
You ate them out of business?
I think I did. I killed it. So.
Well, your uncle was banned, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Banned. They had his picture up on the wall.
Most unwanted.
Yep.
And so anyway, so on the way back from the funeral today, I was with my mother and we went through Townsend looking for some place for lunch. We went to a tavern. I don't know what the name of the place was. I'd never been there before. She'd never been there before. We sit down to eat lunch. And above, this guy, I guess, goes to antique places and collects signs and things like that. There are signs all nailed all over the place. And just adjacent to our table, up on one of the beams, was the old Oaken Bucket sign.
No, no kidding.
So I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of fitting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I didn't eat that much today, which is probably good. I can't eat nearly that much anymore. But anyway, so, and let's see what else is going on. It was last year that Cheryl passed away.
Yeah, we were talking about that on Norman Friends today.
Just to get you up to date, Cheryl Mayer was the one who actually started the show about a year and a month ago.
Yeah.
About that. She was only about a month.
Yeah, because we only got 4 episodes in.
Yeah, because Cheryl Mayer was a young woman who was she's really, really pretty, a go-getter. She was the one who outed the senator from Utah?
I think it was Utah, yeah.
I think it was Utah, about messing around with her when she was just a teenage kid.
Nevada.
Oh, it was Nevada,
yeah.
okay.
And she ended up, so it was last year at this time that she was shot in Ware.
Yes.
And we did a tribute show for her about the next week, right?
Yeah.
It was like a week.
Oh, yeah.
That following week, she had this live hour booked. So me and some of her friends, Elizabeth and who else am I gonna? I'm gonna forget somebody. Charlene.
Charlene. Yep.
And I think somebody else. Who else? Was it somebody else? I know Elizabeth
Yeah,
Charlene.
you know, I can picture him, and I forget his name. I've only met him a couple times.
But anyway, we did a tribute show talking about some of the stuff Cheryl did and had Collins. It was really nice. And so I guess it's a year ago that she's taken from us, and
Yeah.
she's a nice lady. She was fun,
Absolutely.
wicked sharp, wicked sharp. She wrote her own appeal to the state Supreme Court on a decision. She was in her divorce she had with her husband in Derry. They had allowed a what do you call it when you restraining order on her. And the premise of the restraining order was that she was hanging around with some people in Derry at the Friendship Center. And that because she was hanging around with these people from the Friendship Center, she posed a threat to her husband.
Wow.
Well, the friends she was hanging out with at the Friendship Center are people from Alcoholics Anonymous. So because she was getting sober,
Yeah.
a judge allowed her to get a restraining order, which was ridiculous. So she wrote
allowed
that.
him to get a restraining
Yeah,
order.
really,
Yes, I
which
guess
is
her,
insane.
yeah.
I mean, as tenacious as she was never a threat to anybody.
Right, of course. Yeah,
And,
she wouldn't hurt anyone.
Yeah, so it was ridiculous restraining order and ridiculous reason not to get to see the kids. So she wrote, I think that was the one she appealed to the state Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned the decision by the local Derry court, which is the Derry court's a problem in itself. But yeah, she was very smart, very tenacious, really cool. I didn't know her for that long before she got killed, but
Yeah, it was-
anyway.
Yeah, I really
Tragic.
didn't either. I was really honored when she asked me to be her co-host. I was, her and I had been Facebook friends for a while, but then
Right.
I finally met her through Norm because she came on Norm and Friends a couple times, and that's how
Okay.
that's how her and I got to know each other in person. And then
Right.
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah,
Yep, yep.
I only knew her really through Facebook and stuff like that, and then she needed a place to stay when she came back from out west to here to stay so she'd get reunite with her kids after
Yeah.
she had been sick.
Yeah.
And she stayed at my mother's house, who lives next door, for a month, or no, a couple of months. So I think she was back for at least a few months before she got
Yeah.
killed.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to wish Cheryl good luck in her new life and hope she's having fun up there. And I guess she's joined by my Uncle Bill
Yes.
and my Aunt Ann, who died a month before that. So anyway, so I want to cover that. I think I covered that. What else do we want to talk? We want to talk about. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Jay's here to talk about the unions because on most Republicans, I don't know, I don't even understand what the big deal was this year, what the impetus was for right to work. I think Lee and I covered this a little bit last week, but I've been on the legislature since 2000, and every 2 years, right to work comes up. And it probably came up did it come up back in '92?
It did. Yep.
And every 2 years it's defeated. And that didn't matter whether it was Republican Republican governor or Democratic governor. It's always been killed.
Yeah.
This year is the first year it's been made the centerpiece of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
I think that's a spillover from just what's going on nationally.
Yeah.
Because
I don't-
nationally,
yeah.
there's a huge anti-union movement among Republicans. I mean, you see what happened in Wisconsin and
Ohio.
Ohio. Yeah, so I think it's just part of that, part of a larger wave.
Yeah, but
that's
Wisconsin,
happening.
what they don't cover in the news, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, is that yes, the governor kept a seat. If that's right, that's the
Yes.
Yeah,
state.
Scott
The
Walker,
recall.
yeah.
Scott
Yep.
Walker, but in that process, one of the senators lost his seat, so he lost control of the Senate.
Oh,
Correct.
did he? Okay,
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Yes,
Okay.
and-
Well, you don't realize that because the press isn't telling you.
Right.
So, yes, it was kind of a victory for him, but basically he got the rug pulled out from under him at the same time. So the voters aren't all that anti-union.
And the fact of the matter is that was only the third recall in United States history, and only one of them has been successful, and that was Gray Davis out in California
Right.
a couple of years ago. But it's it's very, very difficult because most people will say, well, I might not like what he's doing, but I'm going to give him his opportunity to fulfill his term.
obligation.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Right.
yeah.
So, but it's a very tough process.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But in the meantime, I think that over $100 million was spent in the race. So it was a lot of money raised and spent
Yeah, by
Bashing.
both sides, though.
bashing
yeah.
each other. Yep.
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely.
bashing the crap out of it. And I think that's one of the other thing, too, is this constant bashing of unions. I'll tell you what my position on unions is. That if you look at the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx, one of Karl Marx's prime justifications for communism was the fact that corporations, companies, were using children as labor. I mean, like 9-year-old, 8-year-old children were going into coal mines, they were working in factories here in Manchester, they were losing fingers, losing hands, becoming basically almost unemployable by the time they were 12 years old, at which case they were out in the street. Now, if employers had been moral, fundamentally moral, and treated their employees like you would treat your own children, hopefully, Karl Marx never would have had that arrow in his quiver to actually get a momentum for communism. So that was kind of part of the impetus for that kind of reaction from the people was communism because of the abuse of the corporations. And somehow some of my Republican friends claim that, well, that's okay because now we've got so many laws in place that they can't be abused. People can't be abused. Well, those laws can be changed just as quickly as right to work. That's a false argument.
Right.
Well, there was the bill in this year that would have removed the mandatory lunch hour because the sponsor said, well, everybody gets a lunch hour. We don't need a law telling us to get a lunch hour.
Right.
But the fact is, the reason why you have the lunch hour is because you had the law.
Right, exactly.
Right? You take
Right.
the law away,
Yeah.
you're going to have abuse.
I'll
Of
give
course,
you you an example. I worked at Peterborough Tool, and I went in for an interview, and it was really some fun work. Very, very difficult work. We're making investment casting molds, and I was one of the mold makers there. And when I went in for the interview, and this is a small shop, the guy said, Kenny Stockwell, he's not with us anymore. But Kenny Stockwell says, well, we don't take 10-minute breaks, 15-minute breaks here. I go, really? Because I thought that was the law, but I guess it's not the law in New Hampshire. You don't have to necessarily get a break. It was in Massachusetts, which is where I came from. But anyway, so I shouldn't admit that. Anyway, I retract that. So, so anyway, I go in and he says, this work is so difficult, it's so demanding, intellectually as well as physically, that we don't have a scheduled 15-minute break. We like people to take a break when they need one. If you need to sit down and have a cup of coffee because you're stressed out, take a break.
Right.
And I said to myself, I like that. That's,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's a lot more.
Makes sense.
It makes sense.
Right, exactly.
Until you sat down to take a break. It's like, what are you doing? I was taking a break. Get back to your machine.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding. Huh.
Sounded good, but
It sounded real. I had never heard of that before, so I said, "Oh, that sounds perfectly legit,"
Yeah.
Until you took a break. So that was Peterborough Tool. That was oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's just it. When I go to the legislature, I'm somebody who's actually been, because I've really never wanted to own my own business. I like just making stuff. I'd never really wanted to deal with the paperwork and the legal battles of actually running a business. I like just taking a blueprint and making something with it. I really enjoy doing that. So once you start your own business, you spend all your time doing paperwork and running a business, and you're not making anything anymore. And to me, that would be ridiculous. So anyway, so I've been an employee for 34 years before I was disabled last year, and I know how businesses treat you. It is. They lie to you all the time.
Yep.
You know, and the idea that somehow if the unions were gone, there'd be so many jobs and the corporations love you is so cotton-picking much bull.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not anti-union.
Yeah.
I believe it's the corporation that caused created the necessity for unions, and if you take away that void, that union representation, you're going to go back to 12-year-olds losing their hands in the cotton picking and the mills, because that's what they'll do.
Sure.
Right, and unions do have the ability to help save a lot of money also by negotiating real contracts that make sense.
Yeah.
For instance, this year in the state employees contract, which is the state is the largest employer in the state.
Yeah.
They had over 12,000 state employees and full-time, and we were able to craft a contract that gave back and saved over $50 million through the health care plan
Right.
by restructuring it. So that would not have happened had it not been for the unions coming in and negotiating that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, the unions do. It's, I don't know. Anyway, that's why I'm not anti-union.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know my voting record. I'm not pro-union either. Mm-hmm. I mean, I go back
You
and
take
forth.
the issues
I take the issues specifically
look at them.
and vote on
Yep.
that. But nowadays, if you do that in Concord, you're a rhino.
Yeah.
right.
Republican in name only for anyone who doesn't know the term.
sorry,
but
yeah,
Although
Right.
most people probably have heard it by now, it's become common.
yeah.
Where Rick Olson has that list, right? That's published.
Yeah.
That,
They tried
Rhino
to
of the
they
week or
tried to
something?
label me a rhino after the right to work vote.
yeah.
It's
Well,
just ridiculous.
and some of the testimony on the attacks denigrated to the point where, well, we can't come up with any real facts to make you want to vote for this bad bill, so we're just going to tell you if you're a Republican and a real Republican, then you have to vote for it.
Right.
And that makes absolutely no sense.
When I was taken into the speaker's office, and not just the speaker but other people, this is mind-boggling. Only a politician can believe this. I was taken into the office, and they said we really, because I was in leadership, they said we really need your vote on right to work, or you need to take a walk. Okay, don't vote, just stay the heck out. And I said I can't do that. And they said, well, why? I said, first of all, I don't agree with right to work, but the second thing is a lady at church that she asked me at the beginning of the year, are you going to vote against right to work again? And I said, yeah, I always do. And her name's Kathy, and she said, okay. I said, if I go back on my word, what's the point of me being up here?
Right.
You know, I mean, my word means nothing anymore if I go back on my word. And so this is the argument they said. It says, no, you're not going back on your word. You already voted against right to work. This is to override the governor's veto. Now you're voting for or against the governor.
It's very creative.
It's creative.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very creative. But it was so much bull.
Yeah, yeah. This has been the toughest session that we've ever had.
Yeah, I know. You
And
guys.
the attacks were constant, and it was luckily we had great representatives like yourself that would look at the issues and not vote just because of party lines, and you would listen to constituents
Right.
and
Yeah.
did the right thing. So we certainly appreciate that, and that is really what it came down to this year with a 3-to-1 Republican to Democratic margin. We weren't going to win anything unless we had a big number of Republicans that would stand up to the speaker and stand up to leadership.
Yeah.
And we had over 50 that were consistently supportive, and no matter how much pressure the speaker put on or the other leadership put on, they didn't cave. So we're very thankful for that.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, I just remember meeting after meeting where people would take me aside and talk to me and try to convince me and stuff like that. It was get comical after a while, but
Well, and here's the real problem is out of our membership, we're about 10,000 employees throughout the state, and we mirror the state as the population. So at least a third of our members, 3,000 people, are Republicans and
Right.
vote Republican.
Yeah.
But how are they supposed to feel now that, well, why would I want to vote for any Republican? Because look at what they've been doing to us for the last 2 years.
Right.
And so we've got to be able to talk about the individual candidate and not label Republicans or Democrats, because quite frankly, it comes down to the person and what they're going to vote like, not what party they belong to, or because we've seen some of the Tea Party that would run as Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
Because basically they're neither.
Right. Well, there's two different groups. There's the Tea Party, which are, and I went down to the protest in Washington a few years ago with my son and daughter-in-law, and that Tea Party is primarily a group of people who are absolutely inflamed, enraged at the scope and breadth of government, specifically at that time it was the Obamacare and the constant stimulus packages, where they would take billions of taxpayer money and spend it on stuff to shore up their Democratic base more than it was to actually help anybody. But that's one Tea Party. Then you have the Free Staters, which is an entirely different group that moved up here to try to effect change, and they're running as Democrats and Republicans. I think most of the Tea Party tended Republican anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the Free Staters will do anything, basically, because they're anarchists.
Yeah, they're libertarians, basically.
Libertarians, which
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, beyond libertarian, they're more anti-government, and so they want no rules
Right.
or regulations. And
Well, that's my perception of
Very limited
libertarians. I mean,
Yeah.
they want it to be like the Wild West.
Pretty much. I mean, one of the bills that I voted against, another bill that I'm anti-Republican, because I voted against it, was to repeal payday lenders. And again, it's about morality. I mean, you've got people out there who will completely take advantage of somebody who's not making any money.
Yeah.
You know, they're on the bottom of the social barrel. They're barely making it by, and these people are just nailing them with
yeah.
interest.
It's got to
And-
be one of the most predatory industries.
It is, and
anywhere.
it's so profoundly immoral.
Yeah.
And that's how I base my votes, is whether is it moral or not. Because but my scores went down because of that, because I'm not libertarian enough.
well, scores for some people, but
Yeah.
scores for others,
Yeah.
you went up, right?
Yeah, I guess, but
Yeah, the libertarian issue is the right to work is pretty complicated, but basically what it does is it lowers wages. Every state that is right to work has lower wages, higher infant mortality.
well, I don't see the correlation. Just because of the lack of money.
Well, because right to work is attempts to limit unions' ability to negotiate contracts. So wages consequently go down. Even if there's relatively low unionism in New Hampshire, it still sets a bar at a wage, right? So other non-union operations have to stay pretty close to it, or it's going to become a union, right? So the unions try to set the wage scale for the area.
Right.
And so a right-to-work state will have limited unions and ineffective unions, and therefore wages will be depressed.
Well, I know that as a machinist and tool maker, I never made what the union guys did. Okay, because I was never in the union.
Oh, okay.
But I always knew that the only reason I was getting paid close to what I was making was because they knew that if it got too low, either people would unionize or they wouldn't
would
be able to hire anybody.
They would jump ship.
They would jump ship.
And that's exactly right. That's why there's the national movement all across this country in Wisconsin, Ohio, and in other states that went after the unions to bust them throughout the country and lower wages
Right.
for everyone.
Okay, so ultimately, so there's an economic benefit, even if you're not a part of the union, like
Correct.
the position you were in, there's an economic benefit to just having the unions there.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Exactly.
But it's like a balancing. It's a power balance too. If you get a situation where the unions get too ridiculous, then you depress the economy. You know what I mean? Because people can't afford to pay. In other words, like if you go into a Boston, there's so many unions, like so many members of unions, that the tax burden on those people gets too high. The unions become too strong, and it starts depleting the resources of the taxpayers. So there's a balance. If you get too much power in the hands of the unions, it can kill an economy, and not enough, and you kill the workers, I think.
Well, and here's what's happening now. There's a move to limit government, shrink government. You hear it all the time. And what that really means is that it's shifting.
You have to be a little closer, I think.
You're shifting the current public sector jobs and making them private or nonprofits.
Okay.
And there's no control over wages. And I use the example of Easter Seals. Easter Seals does a great job in what they do, but they're almost solely funded through taxpayer dollars, either state or federal money.
Yep.
And yet the individual, the CEO of Easter Seals New Hampshire, made $517,000 last year. It's a relatively small operation. I think they do $22 million worth of business a year.
Right.
The state, on the other hand, the Commissioner of Health and Human Services makes, what, $120,000, $125,000?
Right.
They do $3 billion worth of business a year, and they have, what, 3,000, 4,000 employees,
Right.
right? So there's no checks and balances when it goes over to the private sector.
Now, do you have any idea how much the employees are making at Easter Seals? Are they volunteer or
No, a lot of them are
full-time?
full-time hourly. It's not as good as the state pay typically,
Yeah.
because what they do is they shift most of the money up to the
To the top of the food chain.
Exactly.
Okay.
But at the end, they're providing services that cost more than if the state was providing it. We know exactly how much every single state employee makes, who the highest paid state employee is, but you don't know, once that money goes to the private hands, how much is paid to the CEO, how much is paid to the workers.
Board of directors and this and that. Okay,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we're spending a lot more money than if we kept it in-house and did it with public sector workers.
Okay.
Now, there are some things that lend themselves to the private sector, but there are some things that don't. Right now we're discussing whether to privatize the prison. And here, if you think about business, Coca-Cola has to sell more bottles of Coke to make more profit.
Right.
Prisons, this is a private for-profit business that wants to keep the beds filled, right? So their recidivism rate, they
Oh, wow.
have,
Yeah.
have basically no programs to rehabilitate,
Right.
because it's not in their best interest to rehabilitate.
Exactly.
They make
Yep.
more money, and we've seen study after study that they get written up for minor infractions that increase their time in incarceration.
Oh, yeah.
And who pays for it is the taxpayers,
Right, because they're still paying X number of dollars per head, and so the more people that stay in prison, so the incentive is to basically keep people in there as long as they can, and if they do get out, make sure that they're in no way capable of staying out.
And I can guarantee you that every bed in a private prison is going to be full because they're not going to make any money if they're not.
Right.
And that's not, that shouldn't be the way we treat our judicial system.
Right, no, it should be, you put somebody in there because they are a threat to society. When they no longer are a threat or fill their sentence, you let them out. And, I mean, I disagree on one hand in that I don't think our prisons do even a reasonable job trying to rehabilitate anybody. So I'm not
gonna
sure
argue
that variable would change all that much.
Oh,
But
it does.
it does.
Because
You go from
have,
0 to -0?
Well, because you have a disincentive
Okay.
for the company now.
Yeah.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar operation.
So I thought I had seen some study where they looked at recidivism rates in states of states that have public, state-run prisons versus privately run, and the privately run states I think had higher
Recidivism?
It's always a tough word for me. Recidivism rates than the
You got to practice that
Yeah.
before the next show, okay?
recidivism. Recidivism.
Yeah. So we believe that there are just some things that don't lend themselves to a private corporation running.
No, I hadn't actually thought of that from that angle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes back to something else too. Is like we were talking about. Sometimes you have to vote on the issue specifically, and not because you're a Republican you have to vote a certain way. Because it's like something like that. If I was kind of leaning towards privatization and I heard this, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We're going to keep people in there a lot longer because the longer they're in, the more money that corporation makes. And
The state loses all control. They sign over all responsibilities to the corporation. So the corporation is going, and they're in many different states. They're going to be moving prisoners around to suit their own needs, not what's best for for New Hampshire.
No, if you got somebody who's in there, let's say for 9 months or a year and a half because of DWI, and really probably what they need is not to be in prison but to be in a rehab for alcoholism. And now you put that in the hands of a private corporation, and I know how corporations are maybe not immoral but amoral at best. And they say, well, we can ship him over here to New York. Well, you've just made it so he can't see his children.
No.
What did that do to the 3 kids
Yep.
for that entire year while Dad's in New York? 'Cause they can't obviously afford to hightail it over to New York to visit Dad on the weekends. I mean, it's bad enough going up to Berlin.
Right.
So it's a ripple effect.
Yeah, so yeah, okay. Wow, I'd never thought about that way.
Yeah, and what they do is they lobby for new laws that help put more people
Of
behind
course,
bars.
of course.
ICE is a prime example of the immigration issue, which is a tough issue, but now we're putting more and more people behind bars for immigration issues, and the private prisons are running basically all of that.
Oh, really? Down in Sound South, that's mostly all private?
It's all private.
That's why I'm skeptical. I think we should legalize marijuana, but I know it'll never happen for that reason. You legalize marijuana, now these corporations that run these private prisons, they're going to lose a big chunk of their client base if we're not locking people up for smoking pot.
Most people behind bars have some sort of substance abuse.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I agree with that in part, but I think the marijuana being illegal, what that does is gives people, in other words, somebody gets out on parole, a violation of that parole would be marijuana. And that's why, in other words, they're not really behind bars because of marijuana. They're behind bars because they beat the crap out of somebody and broke both their legs. And they're back in prison because of marijuana, but they're not in prison specifically for marijuana. I don't think we have that many people that are in prison only for marijuana.
Well,
But I
they're
don't-
committing crimes because of it.
Nah, people get stoned, they eat Twinkies.
Well,
They drinking alcohol and the other drugs, I agree with you. But I think personally, I think the prime cause of crime and stuff like that is the complete breakdown of the family. There has to be an impetus for people to do drugs to begin with and to start drinking to begin with. And if you destroy the family, you destroy that infrastructure that would help keep that kid on the right path. And that's, to me, is the cause. And I think alcohol and drugs are tend to be symptoms of a greater problem.
well, and private prisons are not the solution.
No, private prisons aren't
And especially
the solution.
here in New Hampshire, it's not the solution.
But what now? If you pointed out a couple of cases where privatization is definitely not a good idea, are there cases where it is?
I'm sure there is. Yeah, there are some things that are better left to the private sector. I don't think that privatizing the liquor stores would be a good idea.
Okay, why not that one? Because I voted for that.
Because the reason why we sell so much liquor and make so much money is because it's state-run, so you don't have the tax issues. If it went to a private vendor,
Right.
then you would have to increase your tax on it because it's in the private sector.
Even if it was distributed through the state.
If it was,
In other words, if the liquor went through the state and then the private vendors bought it and sold it.
you would still have to increase the tax on it to make any money.
Really?
Yep. And every other state does it. I mean, that's why we're able to keep the prices lower, and you have people from all over the country driving through New Hampshire. Our liquor stores are open all but 3 days a year,
Right.
and they're very convenient, and because we're selling a lot to out-of-staters that are escaping the higher taxes on when
yeah.
when private industry sells it.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think we disagree on that. I think you could still make just as much money as far as the state goes, but still sell it locally. But as somebody who doesn't drink, I don't really care one way or the other either. So, but
I think that the liquor makes a lot of money for the state.
oh yeah, I'm sure it
And-
does.
By selling it off, you would maybe take a short-term infusion of cash, but your long-term, you'd be losing money every single year.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And, you know, this year, or 2 years ago, the election, we thought that the most important issue facing all of New Hampshire families was jobs.
Right.
And we've seen everything but job creation. And in fact, state employees, there was over 1,100 positions that were eliminated. So right off the bat, you're starting with a deficit of jobs that were decent paying, that had provided benefits, had a pension, that are no longer available to people.
I didn't know it was that many.
Yep, it was over 1,100.
Now they didn't fire anybody though.
They did. They did.
How many?
They had layoffs. They had hundreds of layoffs.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. I thought it was just
A lot of them were unfilled positions.
right. Because we have a lot of that in the budget where they'll say, well, you're cutting positions, but what the truth is somebody hasn't been in that position for 2 years and they're just not filling it. So they just cut the position.
Right, but they just went through and cut positions in every single agency. And what we've been advocating for is the state should decide what they want to do, and then they should do that well, instead of taking a slash and burn approach and
Yeah,
saying
blanket kind of.
you have to reduce your budget by, everyone has to reduce their budget, because that doesn't make any sense. You know, it's the same thing when we were discussing furloughs,
Okay.
for instance.
Right.
What we were arguing is we wanted to use a sensible furlough system where you were not forcing furloughs in places that are already understaffed, like the state hospital. We're forced overtime already. By forcing more furloughs there, you would have increased the overtime.
Okay.
If you forced furloughs on the liquor, you would have lost liquor sales because you would have to close,
Right.
right? So we were saying that we could do real furloughs that made sense and could save money, but only in those places where we could actually do it. And then we were also saying that you shouldn't furlough those people that are on the lowest wage level because, number one, you don't get much in return because they're not making that much, and the
Well,
chances
that's what they do they tried doing at the high schools, or the schools, is they when they get rid of positions, they'll get rid of, all these people that are making $8 or $9 an hour as like an assistant or something. It's like,
you need
what-
a
what
lot of
did
those
you
jobs,
gain?
right? You need a lot of those jobs, and those are people that are doing a lot of the work.
yeah,
And
well,
so we were saying that we should try to do voluntary because people that are in the upper wage levels, they could actually take more time off,
afford to.
and you'd get some real savings for the state.
Yeah, administrative level, they could afford to.
Right. And the chances of putting a family that are low wage into a severe crisis and their inability to pay their rent or their car payment is real when you're forced a 5-day furlough upon those.
Right.
And that
low
has
wage.
a ripple effect in the economy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is through all the rhetoric we've had in Concord and a lot of hostility in Concord in the last couple of years. I don't remember it being this bad, and I've been up there for a while. I don't know. You've been up in the halls for a lot of years. Have you seen it?
Oh, never. It, the tenor of all of the hearings were just terrible. You had some chairs that wouldn't even listen to any of the testimony, would shut down testimony, and we're supposed to be a citizen legislature that all bills have an open and public
Hearing.
process.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen in a lot of places.
Yep. I know.
And I've never seen it like this, and hopefully we never will again. I think that November is going to be bringing some big change. I don't think it can look like it does today.
Right.
I wonder if that's also part of kind of a national wave, because you see.
I don't know. I think New Hampshire's going to buck the national trend.
I hope so.
Because, like I said, I think you get a lot of states where the unions have, because it's a power balance.
Yeah.
If you have too much union, then you don't have enough this, and,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Yeah.
And in New Hampshire, the state employee unions aren't that the number of people employed in a union in New Hampshire really isn't that large.
No, it's around 10% of the
Yeah.
total workforce.
Yeah, I remember
Right.
Lee Quant last week pointing that out too. That number is not very
Relatively
high,
low.
so it's not.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it shouldn't be as big a deal as it is.
And it's I think we got 5-something% in unemployment,
Right, relatively low.
relatively low unemployment. So the whole idea with going right to work was to to increase employment. But the fact of the matter is, we're almost at as low as you can go.
It never does that. Any state that has, and there's only been 3 or 4 in the last 20 years that have gone from non-right to work to right to work. Oklahoma was the last, and it went the opposite way. They lost manufacturing, and their
And why would they
unemployment
lose
rate-
manufacturing?
Well,
Theoretically, businesses are jumping through hoops to get into right to work states.
some of them, and here's the disconnect between what the libertarian says and what they do. So what this bill said is that corporations do not have the right to negotiate a contract that has agency fee. That means that everyone that benefits from the contract has to pay at least the amount of money that is associated with negotiating and administering the contract.
Okay.
And so what this bill says is to a corporation, no, you cannot do that. So on one hand, they want less regulation, but on this one instance, they want more regulation.
Right,
They want to dictate to a private corporation that you cannot do this.
right.
We've had, and you've probably known this, we've had many corporations come up and testify against right to work, saying, no, we are fine the way it is now. Leave us alone.
Well, Mike Kevlar was in the dry cleaners, so I actually didn't go to any of the right to work.
And we've always had corporations that came up, and we've never, ever had a corporation in the years that it's been up there, never once has a corporation came in and testified saying they need right to work.
Yeah.
Right.
They want it.
Well, the whole argument is ridiculous in another regard, because if you're a corporation, there are so many variables that go into whether or not you want to reside in New Hampshire, and the electric prices and stuff like this, the property taxes, the tax structure, the business tax structure, the availability of electricity, and things like that are a lot more relevant than whether it's a right-to-work state.
Well, and even the argument of Speaker O'Brien was that this would increase jobs in the state. Well, the public sector does not create jobs. We've heard that many times.
Yes.
So how would making a right to work for public sector increase jobs?
No, it's absolutely right.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So if you've got now the public sector has most of the union employees in the state, right? Private sector,
It's very small.
what is it, 2% or something?
I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's relatively small.
Right. So the actual number of people that this would affect, as far as in the private sector that he's so concerned about, is too minute to even concern yourself with.
Right.
So it's
Right.
not really, because there's not really that many union, like machine shops and things like that.
Right. It was a very thinly veiled attempt to say it's for the economy, when in fact it hurts the economy.
Right.
It lowers wages, and lowering wages is not good for small businesses, and we need small businesses to survive in this state.
Right.
Some of the things that were done this year, one of them is the tobacco tax decrease. I mean, I can never imagine.
Well, I actually voted for that because on paper it sounded good.
Why? Because more people would buy cigarets?
Yes.
I mean, that's not good
Which I
for
don't-
us.
Which, no, I know, but
I mean,
anyway.
our healthcare costs are, because
Yes.
of smoking is immense. So it's better to keep people not smoking. Lowering the tax just cost us $20 million.
Well, that's just it. I was amongst the people who believed that if you lowered the tax on cigarettes, because I'm really not all about taxing people if you can get away with it anyway. I also believe that when you tax cigarettes, you're talking about the lower socioeconomic rung of the ladder. Those are the people that actually smoke. So every time when the Democrats would raise,
I think that's a overgeneralization, but
I can do that. So, so to me, every time the Democrats would raise cigarette taxes, I'm thinking of the person who's just barely, getting by. Now they got to pay more for their addiction.
but studies have shown over and
Anyway.
again that if you raise the taxes on the cigarettes, you'll have less younger people starting to smoke, and that's
Yeah.
what you want to do.
Yeah, but I disagree with you on that. I mean, I disagree. I don't disagree that you're correct. I just don't think the state has a vested in. I don't agree. Anyway, so I used to always vote against increasing cigarette taxes. So to vote for a decrease was logical, but what I didn't know was that as soon as we did that, the tobacco companies would raise the price of a pack of cigarettes by the same amount, so that you didn't actually increase revenue. You just basically
Just giving away that
you
money.
just gave away the money to the tobacco companies.
And don't you think that on some level that was preordained? I mean,
It
That came up on the show. Somebody else floated that
Lee
theory.
floated that theory, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That it was just too coincidental.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
and,
It was
and
the
Because
very
it was
week.
so quick, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
the week after.
yeah.
They happened
was-
to raise the wholesale price the exact amount that you
Yeah.
lowered the tax by.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is, I think there are, because that would have to be from all the different tobacco companies, so that means they were conspiring, and I think that's illegal. There should be, if
Price
there's,
fixing?
that's
Yeah.
price fixing,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I think that some politicians decided, well, let's go ahead and push this because they were getting something from big tobacco. They might not have been in on the fix, but that's what happened. And
Yeah.
in return, we lost over $20 million that would have gone into real programs for the citizens of New Hampshire.
No, I agree. I think we got had, but I think it's more, it's like a conspiracy or something, because it was way too coincidental. I could understand if one of the tobacco companies said, "Oh wow, we just raise our prices. I don't care," but the other one would keep it low so they get more sales. But they didn't do that. They all went
Yeah.
they all agreed to go up at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty suspicious.
Right.
Well,
They-
the oil industry gets away with that kind of stuff. I'm sure it
It's-
happens
it's-
more than
Right,
we
we would have
probably
been much better off if you decreased the cost of fuel, right? Especially wintertime when so many families are struggling to keep their homes warm
I think we talked about that too.
rather than cigarettes.
Yeah, well,
mean,
you
that
can
made
keep
no
warm
sense.
with cigarettes.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
Yes,
Especially
yes.
if your house is on fire because you fall asleep with the cigarette. Or
Right.
something.
It gets
you-
pretty warm.
You get a
It gets
nice
very
toasty
warm.
evening.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
See, Jay, you don't think like that. I'm a genius. I told you that, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
you've
so-
mentioned that. Plus, the more people who die from smoking, it frees up parking.
Actually, you know.
But to the cost of the health,
good
point.
the cost of the health system while they're dying. is,
Wait, no. I actually heard, and this is kind of sadistic, but I like it, that actually is not really true.
And who said that? Tobacco
Okay, no.
companies?
No, it wasn't tobacco companies, because it wasn't a positive thing, but it was a realistic thing, was that if somebody dies from cigarettes, the cost in the last 2 years or whatever of taking care of them is no different than if they had never smoked. The only difference is the time at which they die. In other words, if somebody dies of heart disease when they're 85, in the last 2 years, it's cost X number of dollars to take care of them. If they die of cancer at 65,
So you're going to say to
wait.
diabetics that smoke and lose their leg because of poor circulation.
Wait, let me finish. So somebody who dies at 65 because of cancer, it still costs the same amount of money to take care of them in the last couple of years in their life. They just die 20 years younger. So in effect, you've taken... in effect, you've reduced the 20 years of time that they would have been on Social Security, so you reduce taxes and you save
I'd
money.
love to see who wrote that study.
No, I just made it up in my head. But
And again, use free up parking.
yes, and you free up parking. So see, you're wrong.
It's hard to find a spot.
You
out
can't
there.
argue with that, Jay.
No, you can't.
No,
it's,
I mean-
it's clear logic.
It's clear.
That's what we aim for here.
Yes,
And
yes.
you got that.
I know. I have Matt and I, have a unique way of looking at things. You know what your buddy Lee did
He
share?
taught you how to.
He taught us how to set up a hand grenade for tripwires.
useful life experience.
Very useful
Yep.
life experience that he had
Yep.
that he was able to share with us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't get that on any other show.
No, that's why I try to spend as much time with Lee as possible.
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
No, I learn a lot from him,
Yes,
an awful lot,
an awful lot.
and
yeah.
you laugh a lot too.
Yeah, he is. He's funny.
Yeah. You know, the one other issue that we're dealing with, that everyone has dealt with as public sector workers, has been the retirement system, and that's been, one of the more tragic bills that came out, and what that did to many of our members who had worked a lifetime for the state and then feel as though for that years of service, they're just being swept
Targeted.
aside.
Yep.
And the reality of the system is that most of the money in the $5.5 billion fund has been put in from the employees. And the employers put relatively small money in, and it puts over $50 million into the local economy every year. Retirees spend all of their retirement check. They don't save it for anything, right? So they're
Right.
going down to the local grocers. They're going to the restaurants. They're keeping the economy going. I can't imagine what our foreclosure rate would have been had we not had a real retirement system.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, I think part of the problem is you hear the horror stories, and I think particularly in the police, I don't know if it rolls over to the fire department, where you have people who spike their hours right for the year or two before,
And let me say that
and which increase. So you got some police officers who were retiring at twice the rate that they used to actually make, and I want to comment to the people out there that really isn't a state issue. Almost all of that is local. The town of Ware has to approve the police contract. They have to approve the teacher's contract for the middle school, for the John Stark, or in Manchester, the people are the ones approving these contracts. If you don't like them, vote no.
well, and the people that are truly abusing the system, like the Bill Fennemans of the world,
Yes.
they're not rank and file employees. The union didn't do that.
Right.
That was a deal that, because he's management and made with management to give him special perks that no one else could get.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't happen like people think it does.
Yeah,
Right.
no. And the other thing, before we close, quick one. In my second term in office, there was a gentleman named Wayne Vetter, who was the director of Fish and Game. Wayne Vetter was so abusing the women in his office that the women used to call each other when one would get accidentally stuck in the office by themselves with Wayne Vetter. The other one would call and say, "Hey, you got to get back here." You know, they would call each other to try to keep two women in the office all the time
Wow.
because it was that bad. That's just the tip of the iceberg of what was going on over there. When I filed a bill of address to have Wayne Vetter removed, who was friends with the Speaker of the House, because I do stuff because I think they're right. I don't really care what the Speaker says, because you go up there to represent the people, not the
Yep.
Speaker. I don't know if my fellow Republicans
Imagine
know
that.
that.
Imagine
You
that.
go up there to represent your constituents, not the Republican Party and not the Speaker of the House. Anyway, so the Speaker was really mad at me. A lot of people were really mad at me. I went to the National Organization of Women. I said, I need your help. I'm in over my head. This is only my second term of office, and I've bit off way more than I can chew. I really need some legal help and stuff like that. They wouldn't touch it because he was too politically well connected.
Wow.
The only group, the only people that would actually stand up and support me and support the bill and support those women in that office was the State Employees Union. He was the only one that had the nuts to stand up beside me and against the Speaker of the New Hampshire House. So,
And that's
wanna-
why we
wanna
love you
thank you.
and support you.
All right, we got to go.
hey,
Thank you.
Matt, you're the best.
You too, Gary.
I don't care what I say on Facebook.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Jay, thank you
Thanks for
very
coming
much.
on.
You're
Thank
all
you.
right for a Democrat, by the way. I just want you to know that.
Bye, everybody.
Hey, what the heck is this?